just to do a high level walk together. Like
Oh,
to have
sure.
the big picture, but
Okay.
it will be that we trimming that. Okay, good morning. Today is Tuesday, March 29th, 2024. It's 11:30 a.m. It's a meeting, Senate Natural Resources and Energy. We are taking up this week. We're starting this week, and I think we'll be on this bill and related bills for the next 3 weeks or so. S311, an act relating to bringing everyone home. We have kind of a companion bills in our committee, S308. And we also expect at some point a bill from the House on related topics. But for now, we really want to lean into 311 and understand that bill through and through. Later this week, just for people, this is going to be the focus of our work. Certainly this week and next. On Thursday, though, we will pause briefly to get some testimony related to the Superfund bill, because there's a section of that may be of interest on greenhouse gas emissions to this committee. For that, good morning, Mr. Kowski. Thank you for coming in. If you could walk us through, and I think since this is really material near to this committee, if we could walk through in detail on these sections. The other sections, for instance, on tax and housing programs, we'll do a high level walkthrough with the councils, but it's been that good.
Sure, Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So today you're looking at S311 as voted out of Senate Economic Development. That is draft 3.1 dated February 16th. There is an accompanying outline of the bill. It's not a full section by section, but it is an outline of what the sections are. And so if you look at it, the sections that I wrote are sections 1 through 26. And yes, the other sections were by Kirby and John. But so this bill covers Act 250, municipal zoning, the downtown and village center tax credit program, and then new Act 250 tiers, which you've already sort of previewed. So the first.
I'm sorry, I thought of one other housekeeping thing. I'm sorry to interrupt. Because we didn't know how long the floor would go today, we didn't have the sponsor of the bill commit, but we'll schedule time for the bill sponsor to speak to us.
Yeah. And so this bill makes a number of changes to Act 250 and zoning to sort of build on last year's Home Act. And so the focus of it is slightly different than S308 and H687. The sort of through line between all the bills, though, being the section on Act 250 tiers, which came out of the NRB's report. So that's the last part. So I will start with the walkthrough though. So there is first a handful of Act 250 related sections primarily related to housing. So on page 1, there's a short title of the bill, the Home Act. Section 2 amends Act 250 in section 6001. Section 6001 of Act 250, as you will recall, is the definition section of Act 250. It also contains, as part of that, the jurisdictional triggers for what triggers Act 250 jurisdiction and the need for a permit. So on page 1, the definition of development includes the construction of housing projects such as cooperatives, condominiums, or dwellings, or construction or maintenance of mobile homes or mobile home parks with 75 or more units, constructed or maintained on a tract of tracts of land located within a municipality with permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws, served by municipal sewer and water infrastructure as defined in 4303, and owned or controlled by a person within any continuous period of 2 years. So I'll stop there and say, currently under Act 250, there is a jurisdictional trigger that the construction of 10 or more units of housing within 5 miles within 5 years triggers Act 250 jurisdiction. This is changing that jurisdictional trigger. So the first thing it's doing is it's raising the number to 75. So the construction of 75 or more units would need a permit, less than that would not need a permit. If they are located within a municipality that has permanent subdivision and zoning bylaws, so if the town has zoning. And served by municipal sewer and water infrastructure as defined in 4303. That definition is includes things beyond. So it's a nuanced definition that you worked on last year in the Home Act. And so it does give the town the authority to define through an ordinance what these areas are, because there are some carve outs for if it's a system that is limited to a specific purpose, like going to a old home park, or if there's environmental constraints or constraints on the system. So there's some nuance in that definition. And then finally, it is also removing the jurisdictional trigger of within the 5 miles. And then, but it's using that to be, we're tying it to the town now. So previously it needed to be located within 5 miles. This is within a municipality with permanent zoning subdivision bylaws and water and sewer. And
So much.
Sorry, I'd love for you to finish your sentence. I don't mean to interrupt.
well, and then finally, it's within a period of 2 years. So the clock restarts after 2 years as opposed to 5. So there are a lot of changes happening to this definition.
Thank you. Does this mean that if a municipality does not have permanent zoning, that nothing is triggered?
There is actually additional language on the next page. So they are setting up. This is somewhat this does coincide with the concept of the tiers that we're gonna get to under Act 250. And so currently under Act 250, there is regardless of whether or not the town has zoning, it's a 10-unit trigger. But for other commercial development, it's based on whether or not the town has zoning, and that is 1 acre for 10 acres. And so they're sort of merging these concepts here, and then other towns that don't have all these elements, there's a 30-unit threshold and a 10-unit threshold.
Okay, so there are thresholds still preserved, they're just not right here.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think that is the only, well, it's interesting to think about it as like, we've lifted the trigger for a number of units, but we've lessened the trigger for time. So if you were to build a lot of units and some at year 3, that would, would that? Sorry, I'm just like thinking through this, so that would not, like if you're gonna build 60 units within 2 years and then another 60 units in year 3. Normally that would trigger activity, that now it would not, because the time is less.
It sort of depends on when that second set is built, because it's within 2 years.
Right, if the second set happens in year 3. Or is initiated, I suppose, then that would not trigger this, whereas it would now, so it's again, by lowering the year, it's making it broader, okay, I just want to understand these two. Thank you.
No, these,
I had to talk to it.
yeah, no,
Figured
there,
out.
this is some significant changes here, cause it is really changing how it is operated for a long time.
One thing I would like to ask if you could work on to help us see better what's going on, maybe like a table. And what I was really thinking is, before we did that S1, sort of the status quo ante, so what was law before we did S100? How much, what did we change, like sort of trigger by trigger, what did we change with 100? And now what are we proposing in 0311? I think it's a little, there's an arc to all this, and it would be helpful if we could see that in context. I know that is a
Perhaps,
quest
can-
for.
we can talk about that.
Well, exactly the best way to construct it, to highlight those changes. I would love to consult with you, but that's the idea, like, where were we before we did last year's stuff? What did we do last year? And now what are we proposing to go back? Because we're not only proposing modifying some triggers, we're also talking about eliminating or overriding things we did last year on priority housing projects. So, I'm just trying to make sure we can really see the path and the choices, so we.
Okay, sure,
And then I suppose we'll talk about it more. You also have knowledge of 6, 8, and 7. So maybe as we do this, you might just flag for us things where we will see alternative proposals when they get here, which I'm thinking is something like 3 weeks from now.
yes, cause that, the House bill is in Ways and Means currently, and it will need to go to approach, and then it will need to go to the floor, so it's
Right, that's common,
at least 2 weeks.
which is perfect, because that we can really focus on it, but.
Okay.
That table will be a best selling table.
I'm gonna have to take like a cell class or something, my visuals are not great. Okay, so next. Is on page 2, it's repealing the definition of priority housing project. So. Priority housing, and the reason it's doing that is to again tie into the tier system in some way and related to these changes. Regarding housing that I just started to discuss and that there is more information on, so. So currently, under Act 250. There is an exemption for a priority housing project. Your committee has discussed this before. These are for housing projects that have at least a 20% of the units are affordable as defined in statute. And they have to be located in a designated area, and then there is a cap on the number of units. And so this has served as an incentive for affordable housing projects previously, because if they met all of the very specific requirements. They could be exempt from Act 250. Now, however, in last year's S100, yes, there was a change there, and you removed the cap on the number of units as long as they met the other definitions of a priority housing project. Let's see, they don't have a cap on the number of units that can be exempt from Act 250. The NRB has a really nice flow chart on how PHPs are defined, if you want to look at that, but later in this bill, there is a full exemption from Act 250 for designated areas. So if you have that, you don't need a specific exemption for affordable housing. Additionally, the jurisdictional triggers for housing are being raised generally and would in some cases exceed the current cap on PHPs. So it's another reason why this concept isn't could or should be repealed because it's no longer it's gonna be subsumed by the other changes.
And I think that we lived, the number of units allowed as priority housing projects was lifted entirely, correct, other than temporarily.
Yep.
And except for at the village center. You know, and if you had a neighborhood development area, something like that. I thought it was supposed to be village centers, but someone said, oh, you also had an NDA associated.
Well, so currently village centers are not eligible for, village centers alone are not eligible for priority housing projects. And so the temporary exemption that you added last year, sunsets on July 1, 2026, and it covers downtowns, neighborhood development areas, and growth centers.
Senator White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologies for being behind you, Alan. Thank you for your great remarks so far. Very cogent in a very complex topic. You mentioned a flow chart that was available to us. Was this what we got from Sabina Haskell in her previous testimony, kind of on the NRB report itself, or the necessary updates to the NRB report, or is that something different? And if it is something different, could we put it on the website or have it available to look at? Because that would be very helpful for me.
Yeah, I don't think it was this topic wasn't specifically addressed, I don't think, in the NRB report. I'm talking about just generally for people who are looking at the priority housing project definition. There's a flow chart to figure out if you're a priority housing project.
Okay, that would be, I'd love to see that. And I don't know if we could request that to be available.
Mr. Cochran.
Or I mean, I could get it to you, or it's on the NRB's website, but
It's on the NRB website? Okay, I'll try to find it. Thank you.
yeah, I think it's called the PHP flow chart. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so still on this topic of housing on page 3. So still what triggers Act 250? The construction of housing projects such as cooperatives, condominiums, dwellings, or the construction or maintenance of mobile homes or mobile home parks with 30 or more units. Constructed or maintained on a tract or land owned or controlled by a person located within a municipality with permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws and within any continuous period of 2 years. So here's that sort of next part of the housing, which is this doesn't have the reference to the requirement for sewer and water. So in a town with permanent zoning, you can construct 29 units within 2 years before triggering Act 250. And then next, construction of housing with 10 or more units in a municipality without permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws within any continuous period of 2 years.
And the whole land of the radius of 5 miles thing is, which was struck in the first one.
Yes.
I'm not going to strike it here because this is new and
Yeah.
it just doesn't bring it up.
Yeah, so I am interpreting it that it's located within a municipality without permanent zoning and subdivision bylaw. I do think it is slightly ambiguous. About across multiple. If it's because we're talking about, we look at the developer here, who is the person making the application.
Okay.
And so how many units can they construct within 2 years before they trigger Act 250? And so if it's located with, I think it is a little bit unclear if it's located within a town. Without zoning, far across the state, that would contribute to the overall total.
Okay, right, so, okay, so being clear that it's a municipal level designation as opposed to. You can be in the town next door, or the next town, I mean, I'm thinking you're saying. The intent is 3 towns all in a row, you could do 30, 30, 30, and they might be within 5 miles.
I think it's something for you to consider.
Yeah.
I don't,
Got it.
especially because you're removing this, yeah, you could clarify.
Actually. So for now, it's silent on distances. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Sorry, Senator McDonald.
so. You do 20 units. Within 2 years, which we could do 60 within 5 years.
Which.
Or 2 years, you could do another 20, and then after 2 more years, you could do. Another 20, so that's 4 years a day.
well, we've got 30, we've got 75, 30, or 10. And so, I don't know where you got 20 specifically, but, if you built 20 in a. It's, it's pence, I don't know where you were going with that,
I don't know where she's going.
Yeah.
So,
help
me.
so. Depending on the location you are in, whether or not there is zoning. Zoning with sewer and water, zoning or no zoning. My understanding is that the time clock starts when you submit your application, not when you have finished construction. But when you submit your application. For. We'll maybe 29 units in a town with zoning. 2 years after that, more than 2 years after that, you could start over and do 29 units again.
2 years of a day, you can submit again.
Yeah.
And. If this PHP. Were conditions of, that this was for PHP housing, but now. That the PHP has gone away,
Yes,
so PHP was affordable housing,
yes,
and this could be mansions.
yes. It's any housing.
We have a mansion shorter.
I haven't got any data on that.
Good.
We can work on a definition though, perhaps.
Pardon?
The definition maybe we could get. As a joke. Okay,
Right, well, so your point is, sometimes I've noticed in the last several months or even a couple of years. Sometimes we walk around talking about language amongst different people discussing the issue. A shared sense of needing more housing. Sometimes people say we need more affordable housing. And then other times the word affordable disappears, so it's always good to say, what are we really talking about when we say housing? And there's a smooth here, there's the new phrase I'm hearing more and more like a middle income housing, the missing middle, things like that, so.
Well, the builders tend to want to build the most expensive house that someone wants built. And which is, some say, part of the problem. So I thought we were looking to create housing that seems to be in short supply. And that people are less willing to construct. Or contracts, or if they've got something more high end to build.
Right, so it is an interesting question, because this concept was created, I think, in 2010, and it was an affordable housing incentive. The change is being made here because the overall exemptions for any kind of housing are, going up. And so you can build more houses in general without triggering Act 250, so it does raise the question of whether or not if you go with what is in this bill, if you need this concept of priority housing project at all, or if you would maybe want to change what they are, perhaps based on where they are.
Well, that's what I was reading.
Yes.
What's the? There's a general agreement that working folks and school teachers and firemen and people and need places to live. Yet we're making exemptions for people that are well outside those categories.
And these, can you remind us again, these proposed redefinitions of development of the triggers are temporary, expire, or this is permanent?
These are permanent changes. Nope. Oh, man,
Because I've heard them described as interim, or some of the features of 311 is going,
yes.
new interim measure, right?
Yes. So that is coming up in section 8, these new housing triggers that I just walked through.
Yeah.
Are sunset June 30th, 2029.
Our current interim measures from S100, Act 47, sunsetted December 31, 26, correct? They took us through the end of 26.
No, July 1, 20, that's the next section, yeah, July 1, 2026, yeah.
So you couldn't squeeze another 75 units in. What's that? Starting on the 1st of July and then
Well,
5 years later, it sunsets, so they can do that. What?
I don't know. How can I say, I don't know. Yes, maybe you could. So at the bottom of page 3, the sunset provision from last year's S100 is being repealed here, and so this is one of the things we passed last year that's temporary until July 1, 2026. It's the construction of housing units with 25 or more units located entirely within a downtown neighborhood development area or village center with zoning or a growth center. So that provision is being struck because, again, you are doing higher caps here. Or this bill is doing higher caps in the first part.
Right, without the designation requirement.
Yes. Okay, so next on page 4, again, it is striking the references to priority housing project. And that exemption. And it's adding new language, so now we're in the definition of. We're still in the definition of development, but this is what is not part of the definition of development or an exemption. And so on page 5, it's adding hotels and motels converted to permanently affordable housing developments as defined in 4303. And so this is an exemption from Act 250 for hotels and motels converted to permanently affordable housing.
So
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question about this section?
sure, Senator White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, council. Can I put out an example? And I just want to make sure that this is covering that example.
Sure.
Sure. Um, so we have a former hotel that is being converted into, I believe, mixed affordable housing. So some of it is affordable, some of it is not. What happens in that instance?
Yeah, so the definition of affordable that's being cited here does require at least 20% of the units or a minimum of 5 units be affordable. And affordable meaning does not exceed 30% of the gross annual income of a house at 120% of the either county median, MSA median, or statewide median. That is for, sorry, owner occupied. For rental, it's 30% of gross annual income at 80% of county, MSA, or statewide income. Median income.
Okay, so in the instance that's a
Yes,
mixed
probably.
income property, as long as it's 20% if it is owner occupied, and 30% if it is not owner occupied.
It is 20% of the units, regardless of if they're like houses or rentals. And they need 20% of the units need to be affordable. Affordable is defined as 30% income at either 120% or 80% area median income.
Thank you.
Is
That
there,
is extremely helpful.
sorry, is there a chart that, lists out examples of what affordable means? With dollar figures, such a thing.
Possibly, that's not really my area. VHFA usually looks at that kind of thing, so potentially. And then I do want to point out, though, that this is the definition of affordable from 24 VSA 4303, which is the municipal zoning chapter. There's a slightly, though it is close, the definition, there's an Act 250 definition of affordable. So they are close to the same definition. And if so, why shouldn't we just be using that definition?
Well, if there's an Act 250 definition and it's doesn't apply,
It might be.
then it's gone. So where in the law does it deal with what we say is what is needed? It's built.
Mr. Chair, may I ask one follow-up question?
Sure, and then I'm noticing, even though we just got here.
Oh, it's 12.
But last question to you. We're letting out the clutch on this bill today. I think about it.
Mr. Chair, can I request, it was a very fast response for my request on the priority housing project flow chart. We got 2 emails in like the course of 2 minutes. So perhaps if the same individuals are watching and are focusing on this conversation and they have an AMI chart or something they could share on this topic, I would love an email. They were so speedy before.
Right, and thank you, Senator White, and to those in the ether who are watching. If you get that stuff, if you could forward it on to Ms. Newman and the committee, great, we can make it a resource for everybody. All right, so we will. Thank you for getting us started. It's a little hard to get started because it's
Crossover.
well, we're also into the weeds necessarily from sentence 1, so and we're all having to set the Wayback Machine and go through what we've done in the last 2 years on this. So thank you so much. we will resume tomorrow, and keep working, and then if before you leave, if you could help Juliana know who we should add, issue invitations on the other section. And with that, thank you, everyone.